From Doha, this is Democracy Now! We're broadcasting from the 18th United Nations Climate Summit here in the Gulf nation of Qatar.
The United States is not the only country that is blocking, but they carry, as a historically the largest emitter in the world, they carry a particular responsibility and has to show particular leadership, which they are absolutely failing to do. And we are totally unimpressed with the comments that Todd Sten. It's too little, too late, and we rather not yet at this point.
We're running out of time. That's the message Kumi Naidoo of Greenpeace International has sent to President Obama. As the United States comes under increasing criticism at the UN climate talks, we'll speak with Kumi Naidoo and Samantha Smith of WWF, as well as a panel of youth climate activists. But first, to Egypt.
We hold President Morsi and his government completely responsible for the violence that is happening in Egypt today. What is happening at the presidential palace at the moment, the violence without protection of the country, is an announcement from the country and from the president that they do not uphold their responsibility to protect the country.
The Egyptian army has deployed tanks outside the presidential palace in Cairo, and 6 people have died in clashes between supporters and opponents of President Morsi. We'll speak with Democracy Now! Correspondent Sharif Abdel-Quddus overlooking Tahrir. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting live from Doha, Qatar. Egyptian forces have deployed tanks outside the presidential palace in Cairo after violent clashes between pro- and anti-government demonstrators left 6 people dead and more than 400 injured. The violence marked a major escalation in the dispute over Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi's effort to hold a referendum on a new constitution later this month, shortly after he asserted wide-ranging powers. Fighting has continued through today, with Morsi supporters and opponents clashing in the streets of Cairo. On Wednesday, opposition leader Mohamed El-Baradei blamed Morsi's government for the violence.
We hold President Morsi and his government completely responsible for the violence that is happening in Egypt today. What is happening at the presidential palace at the moment, the violence without protection of the country, is an announcement from the country and from the president that they do not uphold their responsibility to protect the country.
In a bid to calm the unrest, Egyptian Vice President Mahmoud Mekki has floated the idea of adding amendments to the Constitution in consultation with the opposition. We'll go to Egypt after headlines and speak to Democracy Now!'s Sharif Abdel-Quddus. The death toll from the massive typhoon in the southern Philippines has now topped 310 people, with hundreds more missing. Typhoon Bopa is the most southerly typhoon ever recorded in the western Pacific and the strongest to hit the Philippines this year. Some 200,000 people have also been displaced after winds and flooding destroyed or heavily damaged their homes. At least 3 people have been killed in a U.S. drone strike in Pakistan's region of North Waziristan. The attack targeted a home with a pair of missiles earlier today. Pakistani intelligence says the victims were suspected militants. The Syrian government's accusing Western leaders of trying to drum up support for foreign military intervention by invoking unfounded fears of chemical weapons. This week, President Obama warned President Bashar al-Assad against the use of chemical weapons, vowing unspecified consequences. Speaking on Wednesday to NATO leaders in Brussels, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton followed suit.
Our concerns are that an increasingly desperate Assad regime might turn to chemical weapons, or might lose control of them to one of the many groups that are now operating within Syria. And so, as part of the absolute unity that we all have on this issue, we have sent an unmistakable message that this would cross a red line, and those responsible would be held to account.
In response to the threats, Assad's regime has insisted it won't use chemical weapons against its own people, calling assertions to the contrary a, quote, pretext for intervention. Back in the United States, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner says the Obama administration's prepared to see the U.S. go over the looming fiscal cliff rather than cave to Republican demands for a continued tax break for the wealthiest Americans. Geithner made the statement in an interview with CNBC.
I want to understand the administration's position when it comes to raising taxes on the wealthy, those making more than $250,000. If Republicans do not agree to that, is the administration prepared to go over the fiscal cliff?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, again, we see there's no prospect to an agreement that doesn't involve those rates going up on the top 2% of the wealthiest Americans. Remember, it's only 2%.
Speaking, meanwhile, to the Business Roundtable group of corporate executives in Washington, President Obama said Republicans need to accept the reality that tax rates will rise for the wealthiest Americans.
We've seen some movement over the last several days among some Republicans. I think there's a recognition that maybe they can accept some rate increases as long as it's combined with serious entitlement reform and additional spending cuts. And if we can get the leadership on the Republican side to take that framework, to acknowledge that reality, then the numbers actually aren't that far apart. Another way of putting this is we can probably solve this in about a week. It's not that tough.
New details have been revealed on the retail giant Walmart's ties to the Bangladeshi garment factory, where 120 workers died in a fire last month. The New York Times is reporting Walmart played a key role in blocking the improvement of electrical and fire safety at Bangladeshi factories. Two officials who attended a 2011 meeting in Bangladesh say a Walmart representative helped quash a proposal to improve safety investments, calling them, quote, not financially feasible. Documents found at the fire scene also show 5 of the factory's 14 production lines were devoted to making Walmart apparel. Meanwhile, in the United States, Walmart's drawing criticism for reportedly planning to deny health insurance to newly hired employees working less than 30 hours a week, shifting the burden for their care onto the federal government. An internal company policy obtained by the Huffington Post shows newly employed part-time workers will no longer receive benefits, while those hired in or after 2011 will also lose out if their hours dip below 30 hours a week. Labor experts say Walmart's following other large employers and exploiting Obamacare to shift health costs onto taxpayers. In its response to the story, Walmart refused to disclose how many workers will lose their coverage by saying it's decided to no longer answer questions from the Huffington Post, which it accused of biased coverage. The new policy is slated to take effect next month. The White House is planning to ask Congress for around $50 billion to aid states ravaged by Superstorm Sandy. Although a partisan battle could ensue over the request, it falls short of the combined $82 billion sought for rebuilding efforts in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. A new federal study has found the drilling practice known as fracking can trigger earthquakes. The U.S. Geological Survey found oil and gas operations caused the majority, if not all, earthquakes in certain areas of New Mexico and Colorado between 2001 and 2011. The report's co-author, U.S. Geological Survey scientist Justin Rubenstein, called fracking, quote, a societal risk we need to be considering, he said. And Washington states put into effect 2 new laws today with major national significance. As of midnight today, possession of up to an ounce of marijuana is now legal in Washington state following the approval of a state ballot initiative last month. In enacting the measure, Washington's the first U.S. state to decriminalize recreational marijuana use and the first to do so anywhere by popular vote. Meanwhile, same-sex marriage is also now legal in Washington as of midnight, after also having been approved by voters on Election Day 1 month ago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, and we are broadcasting from Doha. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.